All right, I'm Brian Richardson, serial entrepreneur, founder of prep2exit.com. Welcome to phase 3 of selling your company. This video is going to go over the big picture of the search phase. So by this point, you've gone through the process of deciding whether you're going to sell or not, the benefits of selling it versus keeping it or closing it. And now you're going to go ahead and lean into the process of actually selling your company. You're going to go out and you're going to search for a buyer. That's what this phase is. And so we're going to get right to it, and we're going to go through the aspects about the search for the buyer. So the things that we're going to go over today in an overview format is we're going to cover the search phase of how to search for a buyer. We're going to talk about the responses to a buyer. We're going to talk about how to screen those buyers out. We're going to talk about the importance of the NDAs and what to watch for, the communications about the report on your business, the business book, the pitch book, or the confidential business summary, however you want to call it. We're going to talk about how to gauge the buyer's interest. We're also going to talk about your expectations, the big E, how to manage your expectations while searching for a buyer. And we're going to talk about the big warning signs. So, again, this video is to give you the broad picture, the big picture about what it involves in selling your company and what the search phase is all about, phase 3. So when you're considering, again, this video is for those owners who are thinking about selling their company. They want to understand the big picture. So the summary is in this video. I go into great depth and detail into each one of these subtopics in a completely different video series. You can find that curriculum on prep2exit.com. All right, so let's get into the summary of it today. The first thing I want to cover is the search, is where do you actually search, okay? So it's kind of like the Where's Waldo thing, is how do you know where this person is that actually has money to be able to show up and buy your business, right? So where's the Waldo dynamic? There's 3 ways that you can do it. The first way is you can do it yourself, and you can do it internally. And this is typical where you already have somebody that's interested in buying the company that you know already. And so this could be a partner that's buying you out. It could be your lead operations manager that's been alongside you for years, and you're confident that they could run the company and they could do well with it. If you know who the person is, then this is the first step for selling it yourself internally. Now, what I call selling it externally, right? So you could sell it yourself, but you could do it externally. And this is going to be to somebody that you don't know or is not inside your company. So this would be if you're going to sell it to a competitor, or if you're going to go out on your own listings with bizbuy.sell or some other method, you're going to contact brokers and tell them, hey, I'm representing myself in selling my company, and you can send buyers my way. So this is you doing the work yourself, going out into the world and finding that buyer through a variety of listing methods. And it's somebody that's outside of your company or outside of your circle of influence. Now, this is the third one is typically the one that everybody assumes that you have to do. You can sell your business on your own. You do not have to use a broker or an investment banker. And people ask me, well, what's the difference between a broker and an investment banker? Basically, it's the size of the company and sophistication of it, okay? So if you have a company that's worth more than that does revenues more than about 5 or 10 million, if your cash flow or EBITDA value is around $1 million or higher in compensation, then you're probably going to go with an investment banker. It's just a fancy term for the word broker. In reality, they're doing the same thing. They're representing you and the company to buyers. The level of sophistication jumps up dramatically when you start dealing with companies that make more than $1 million. Companies that have a net profit of more than $500,000. When you start dealing with C corporations or S corporations, the complexity definitely jumps up. So the investment bankers take care of the larger businesses with all of its complexities. Typically, brokers deal with the smaller companies. Another way that you're going to hear it is that brokers will typically deal with small businesses or Main Street businesses, sometimes the lower mid-market, okay? So if you're a medium-sized business or a mid-market business, you're going to be probably dealing with investment bankers. Okay, so now the next thing that I want to talk about is, let's go back up and look at how do you, so you put the search out, right? So let me make a comment. So when you put the search out, and you're going to put you're going to let those individuals know, hey, by the way, we're selling the company, et cetera, et cetera. Now that you've put the lure out there and you have a potential buyer on the hook, how do you do the next piece, right? How do you respond to them? The response is incredibly important. This is the response dynamic is where a banker or a broker really makes a lot of their money, because they actually will increase the deal value dramatically. So I, as a person, as an owner, cannot stay apathetic about my business. I'm emotionally tied up in my business. When somebody potentially comes and interacts with me, it's easy for me to make a personal connection with them, determine whether I like them or not, and therefore the entire transaction can start being influenced by my personal perceptions of the human being that is the buyer, right? So that human element, it's critical to have a third party in that element. Now, if you as a human being are perfectly capable to play poker with high stakes and be able to bluff and keep a poker face, and people can't read you, people can't guess what you're thinking, then you probably will be able to represent and sell your company on your own with not as much difficulty. But for the rest of us normal human beings that are emotional, people can read us, people can understand what our motivations are. If we're fairly open books or we communicate a lot, those of us like that, we should not sell our businesses on our own, because a buyer will take advantage of us all day long, right? So we're emotionally vested in selling our company. It's too easy for a buyer to recognize that and leverage that motivation to their benefit. So having a third party in place to respond to potential buyers is really important to make sure that the value of the transaction stays elevated. And this is where brokers and investment bankers really earn their pay, is because they're able to be unemotional in their interactions with potential suitors on this. Okay, so with that response, there's going to be a song and dance, right? So there's going to be an email that shows up, you've got mail, and there's going to be an email that you're going to respond to, and they're going to send you an email, you're going to send them an email, and then there's going to be a phone call, and then they're going to have a little bit of a discussion of, do I even like you? What's your basic interests? And then that's going to go down to the next level of interacting and potentially getting an NDA or not. The thing is, though, is there's a lot of conversations that don't even get past this point right here. For a lot of buyers, they won't even go past this point. Okay? So they'll do the phone call, but during the phone call, they'll find out that the business isn't even anywhere close. And so they'll just completely stop this process, and it's all done. And so when I talk about expectations in the deal, it is emotionally challenging to receive a lot of interest in a business, have an initial phone call, and then have them say, nope, it doesn't fit my parameters. It's just the dynamics, and as an emotionally invested seller, it's hard for us to keep taking that repetitive no, 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 no. And again, having a third-party representative is extremely valuable right here. Okay, so now on the responses, buyers will also be expecting a certain behavior from you if you're listing your business. And so there's no dumb buyers. They have an expectation of communication, of information, et cetera, et cetera. So as an owner, if we're selling our business for the first time, we've never done it before. If the buyer has experience in buying companies, they're going to recognize right away that we're an amateur at this. So in comparison to selling a house is a pretty simple transaction that has very clear steps to it. You can't change what the house is. But with a business, you could definitely represent what the business is or isn't, and the buyer is able to completely leverage what they do or don't think the business is worth, and it's easy for them to walk away, because basically selling a business is like getting married to somebody. the intimate connection between the buyer and the seller through all of the transaction, all of the months of communication, all the financial impact that's involved. You got to really rely on that person to be communicative, to be honest, to be upfront, etc. So at this stage in the game, having a third-party person in play to show to the buyer the level of professionalism that's involved is extremely important. So having someone that's gone through a lot of transactions, they're going to be able to stay at the level of professionalism that a buyer is expecting, and it keeps us as owners from being taken advantage of at this stage of the game. All right, so let me go up and now let's talk about how to screen out the buyers, right? And so it's kind of like, oh, I don't like that color. Let me get rid of that color here. All right, let me go back to color of the day. Okay, so think about it as a funnel, right? And there's different stages in the funnel. And so you're going to have a lot of interest coming, right? And then you're going to have the phone calls, you're going to have the emails back and forth, and then you're going to have a couple more that are buyers that might get here, and then a couple more buyers that reach there, and then finally at this point that buyer is going to be right. Now these right here might be looky-loos, they may be folks that are competitors and you don't want them to know anything about your business. They could be people that are not interested in providing the type of price point or deal value. They may be looking for a certain criteria and your company just doesn't fit that criteria. So the screening process of narrowing down that buyer to confirm a match to your company is incredibly important right here. There's no sense in wasting all of your time and energies in getting further down the transaction to find out that the base functionality, your business doesn't even fit their criteria, and you could have solved that right up front and saved a lot of time, and heartache. Okay, all right, so that's the screening process. All right, now let's talk about the NDAs. So if they reach here and the criteria fits, right? Like if you have a square and it's good and your business is going to fit inside that, right? The buyer's got this square and your business is this shape and there's a good fit, then you sign an NDA. Okay? And that NDA allows you to talk about more than just the basics of your company. That NDA gives you the freedom to be able to have a conversation with that potential buyer. You know that your business is at least at the first blush a good fit for them. You can start revealing information about your company, and they're legally bound to not reveal it and not take advantage of it. Okay? So again, it's really easy to be able to just start getting into conversations, especially if we're owners that are trying to represent it ourselves and that potential buyer is a really nice person and we really get along with them and we share a passion for the industry and we both love molecular science and the amazing future that's in our industry, et cetera, et cetera. That kind of excitement can start having us share proprietary information about our company before we get that NDA signed. And it takes an act of self-control to ensure the NDA is in place. All right, so now let me go to the next step. I think I hammered that one pretty good. All right, so now once that the NDA is signed, then you can hand over the book of information, okay? And so this goes from just having conversations and chatting with one another to actually letting them see what the book is, what the business is all about. That is the crappiest looking book ever, so just ignore that. I'm going to try that one more time. There we go, like that. There we go. There we go. That's a much better book. Okay, so you hand them this information, and this is going to be a written representation of what your company is all about. And so they're going to need a little bit of time to work with that. And then once they look at that book, then they're going to come back to you with lots of questions. And again, this video is a summary to help you understand the horizon of selling your company. I go into deep detail on how to do all of this correctly in a completely different video curriculum. And you can, again, check that out at prep2exit.com. Okay, so now, all right, now we want to gauge the buyer's interest, right? So we've talked to them up here. We've shown them information here about the business. Now we want to check and see what their interest level is. Is it high or is it low? And I'm going to go back and I'm going to again say that experience makes all of the difference right here. If you're a first-time seller, then you don't really know what questions to ask. Now, this is a high-stakes poker game. The questions asked right here is like a critical moment during a poker game of where you really don't know which way the other guy's hand's going to go, and you've got to look for all those little clues to indicate whether he's got a good hand or whether he's bluffing. This is one of those critical junctures during the transaction with a potential buyer that the more experience a buyer or broker has, the better they are at gauging the buyer's interest. And right here is where the money starts to converge, okay? If their interest is low, you can waste a lot of time before you really find that out, and then you've spent a lot of time and wasted time on here. If you are able to determine that their interest is high, then you're able to really start doubling, tripling, in some cases quadrupling the total deal value that you can get for your company. But again, it takes a lot of experience and expertise to tap dance around this moment of the transaction to accurately ask the right questions in the right moment, in the right method, to be able to accurately gauge the buyer's interest. If a buyer knows that they're going to make 10x off your customer base, then they're willing to pay 5x to get your business. But you don't know that if you don't have the experience to understand how to gauge the buyer's interest and understand the buyer's business model, okay? All right, so, yes, I know it sounds like I'm promoting brokers, but what I'm doing is I'm letting you know that critical moment of where a third party can really make a difference. You might feel comfortable and you might be really good at this moment, but recognize up front, if you're not good at poker and at high stakes poker, then I'm letting you know that this is one of those reasons it's worth going out and finding a really good third party representative, okay? All right, so now, we talked about that, all right, now let's talk about expectations. Expectations, oh my gosh, okay. So a really big deal. All right, so with expectations, let's kind of look at it this way. All right, how many women did you date before you got married? How many men did you date before you got married? Do you marry the first person that you date? No, none of us did. And so, and I apologize, I don't mean to be sexist here. I'm just making a representation. So how many people does it take before we know the one that we want to spend the rest of our lives with, right? Having the correct expectation about finding the right buyer is very similar to this. Just know that you're going to have a quantity of conversations and a quantity of interactions with a quantity of buyers before you find the right one. The right buyer is somebody that fits the criteria that you figured out back in the planning stage. The timing of the deal, the financial method of the deal, their ability to fund the deal, whether it's the internal employee that you want or not, whether you want to sell to a competitor or not, whether you want it to be able to be a legacy or not. All of the criteria you have about an ideal buyer comes into play right here. Every buyer coming at you is not the right buyer. And I'm letting you know that this is a real emotional drain. It's easy to go, oh, I'm excited, I've got a potential buyer. It's very difficult to have that buyer go, you know what, it's not going to work. And the buyer, or potential after potential after potential, hangs the phone up, stops the process, and you never get any further. It's emotionally draining. This is another moment and another reason why having a third-party representative is incredibly important. By having a third-party representative, it allows us as the owners to stay emotionally focused and spend our mental energies and our day-to-day activities on running our business and making money in our business and not getting caught up in all of this impact of buyer after buyer turning away from the door. A broker or investment banker, it's their job to have all of this happen to them, so you and I are free to run our companies. Okay? So knowing which one to pick and all that time and all that emotional energy, let a third-party person do it if you don't have the kind of stamina to be able to handle all of these rejections and all of these walkaways from other suitors. Okay. Now, let me cover the last aspect of it, and I'm going to cover this in red because these are the stop signs. Watch out. Watch out. These are warning signs at this phase of the game. Watch out for competitors. Okay. Watch out for first-time buyers. Watch out for if they have questions that are very basic, that indicates that they don't even have a sense of what's going on. That can be a huge time suck and be a complete waste of everything. And then refusals. Okay, so let me talk about these really quickly. Competitors is really obvious. What you don't want is you don't want a competitor who's just trying to suck information out of you and they're not serious. The worst kind of competitors are ones that you've never talked to before and that you're somewhat aware of, but you have no relationship with them, so you can't tell whether they're being honest or not. Having a third-party representative right here is a great screen against a competitor trying to suck information from you. If you're selling it on your own, my recommendation is that you made sure that you had some kind of relationship with them over the year, that you're able to detect whether they're being sincere with you or not. As an owner of a business, that's one of the things that we're good at is discerning people, etc. One of the businesses I sold was actually to a competitor. So, but I also recognize the dangers of doing that. All right, the next thing here is with first-timers. First-time buyers have the same challenges that first-time sellers do. They don't realize that the transaction is complex, that there's all sorts of potholes that are hidden, and so they also might get stuck at some pothole that they may not have the right advisor to help them get over. Just like you and I as the seller, we've got to have great information to help us through those potholes. The buyer that's a first-time buyer needs to have those kind of advisors also, okay? The other thing about first-time buyers is they will wildly vary in their expectations and outlook on your business. What you think is an amazing aspect of your business, they may come from a completely different dynamic and see it completely different. If you've run let's say that you've run an asphalt business for 15 years and you've got a vice president of operations that used to work for Procter & Gamble in consumer goods, and he retired out on his 401k, and now he thinks he can run an asphalt business, probably not. So you just have to be aware of that fact. Just because he's got money, it may not mean that he can even get through the transaction and buying the company, much less that he's going to be able to run the company after he buys it out from you. All right, so the same dynamic about that. All right, so with refusals, the refusals you want to watch out for is if they refuse to sign an NDA, then don't have any more conversations with them. You got to stop right there. That legal boundary is just too critical. Another one to watch out for is if they're not willing to disclose their funding source. It's too easy to get down the road of a transaction and then for them not to be able to afford the purchase. Sometimes if they're going to do a loan, an SBA loan, if they're expecting to go get funding partners or investment partners, or if they have 2 or 3 other partners involved in providing funds for the buyout, if that buyer doesn't have all of that lined up, then it's a problem for you. And until they can provide some confirmation, then it's not worth your time and effort to continue down the road of a transaction with them when they're probably going to tank out and not be able to finance the deal anyway. So watch out for potential buyers that are not willing to reveal their funding sources. If they're not being forthright with information, then it's better to just to stop the deal. Competitors tend to be this way, but even buyers can be this way, that they're just not honest and they're not clear. And you can, if your radar is going off that for some reason they're not being forthcoming, then trust your gut on this. There's so many difficulties ahead in the transaction. It's better to stop now and then get down that road and crash the deal. All right, and the last one is communication. So there is a lot of communication loops that happen in a transaction. And so you're going to be calling them, they need to call you, information is going to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And this process is going to go on and on and on and on. If they are not good in their communication loop, it's going to be a problem. It's easy to crash a deal, because some really important dynamic to you doesn't get answered by them, or they've got a really big problem and they're not able or willing to communicate it to you. And so deals crash just even from 1 or 2 or 3 days going by and somebody not replying. And it could be that the potential buyer went on a ski vacation and didn't tell their advisors. And so when you've got a question and you send it to them, and their advisors can't even get a hold of them because they're off the grid, and then you're sitting there for 3 days or 4 days with no answer, you're thinking, okay, well, obviously the guy's walked away, and you start going and doing something else. So make sure that if there's any warning signs that the buyer doesn't have good communication loops with you, take that into consideration and definitely pay attention to that. Okay, so that is now that's the summary of phase 3 of the search phase. And so hopefully I've given you some understanding of the big picture of what it's like to go through the search for a buyer and doing the dance with potential buyers and potential suitors. Again, I go into in-depth of all of these details on a different curriculum. You can check that out at prep2exit.com. This is Brian, and I'm really glad that you're continuing forward on this series, and let's get to phase 4.